Good evening, dear listener. I speak to you now from the edge of the world. Here, on this barren rock in the Atlantic, where the winds scrape the stone clean and memory is the only companion left to a defeated emperor, I have found an unexpected clarity. Exile strips a man down to the truth of himself. Titles, victories, nations, they fall away like old paint under the salt air. But the shape of one's life, the hidden architecture of one's destiny, becomes clearer than ever. I look back across the years not as the legend they made of me, not as the ogre of Europe or the architect of modern France, not as the conqueror they feared, nor the monster they painted, but as the boy who first opened his eyes beneath the Mediterranean sun of Corsica. I look back as the young officer whose ambition outran his name, as the general who rose with impossible speed, and the emperor who flew too close to the sun. I look back as a man who lived many lives inside one mortal frame. And so, let me begin not with the empire I built, or the battles that scarred the earth, or the coronation beneath the vaults of Notre Dame. No, grandeur is the last chapter of a story, never the first. Let me begin where all destiny begins, in childhood, in silence, in the unnoticed corners where fate first whispers its name. Listen to me, then. Hear my life as I lived it, not as history judged it. Chapter 1, The Island Boy. I was born in the dawn light of August, 1769, on the island of Corsica, where mountains rise like broken teeth from the sea and the air tastes of salt, rebellion, and old wounds. My mother, Letizia, was a stern woman, hard as the granite cliffs of our homeland, yet capable of a love as steady and unwavering as the island winds. My father, Carlo, possessed refinement, charm, a hunger for gentility. From him I inherited ambition. From her, endurance. The house I grew up in was not rich, nor truly poor. It was alive. 8 children, laughter, quarrels, prayer, the clatter of wooden swords on stone floors. I was small, intense, easily provoked, endlessly serious. Even as a child, I carried myself with a strange inner tension, like a violin string pulled too tight. They scolded me for my pride, but it was not pride, it was urgency, a sense that time was already running ahead of me, and I must catch it or be left behind forever. Corsica itself shaped me more than my family. It was an island haunted by its own dreams of freedom, crushed only months before my birth by the French. The soil carried the memory of resistance. The hills still echoed with Pauli's defiance. I breathed that spirit with every step I took. I loved Corsica fiercely, its ruggedness, its stubbornness, its solitude. Yet even as I adored my island, I sensed it was too small for the hunger in my chest. I remember walking alone along the rocks above Ajaccio harbor, watching the masts of foreign ships rise and fall like ribs against the horizon. I imagined worlds beyond them, vast continents, empires, armies, kings. I did not yet know why these visions stirred me, only that something in me refused to be ordinary. A boy's dreams often drown in the first storms of reality, but mine did not. They sharpened. When my father secured a scholarship for my education in France, I did not weep as the island faded behind the ship. I felt the tearing, yes, the wound of leaving home, but beneath it burned a quiet, fierce certainty. I will not return as a child. I will return as something more. Yet destiny, like the sea, has its own tides. It carries you forward even when you long to look back. Chapter 2, The Outsider, France. How cold that word felt the first time I stepped onto its soil. Everything in France was different. the air, the language, the eyes of the boys who mocked the way I spoke their precious French. I, Napoleon de Bonaparte, son of Corsica, was nothing in their world, an outsider, a provincial, a curiosity. They laughed at my accent, my volcanic temper, my crooked little suit that fit no French fashion. I responded as I would respond all my life when confronted with contempt. I withdrew into my mind, and there I sharpened myself. Books became my companions. History, mathematics, geography, Plutarch's lives of ancient heroes. I devoured them under the thin glow of a candle in drafty dormitories. Nights were long, bitterly cold, filled with the echoing taunts of boys who slept easily because they had never needed to dream of survival. I lay awake and studied empires. I memorized campaigns. I measured the world in lines of march and angles of artillery fire. If they would not accept me, I would surpass them. There is a particular loneliness in being young and convinced of your destiny. It isolates you from your peers, sets you apart from their laughter and their small troubles. I did not envy them. Their world was too small. I loved the ancient conquerors, Caesar, Alexander, not for their power, but for their vastness. Their minds stretched continents. Their wills shaped centuries. Why should France be enough for me? Why should the present satisfy a mind haunted by the echoes of antiquity? Yet even in my ambition, I was a boy far from home. Sometimes, after the lamps were extinguished and silence settled over the barracks, a homesickness seized me with a violence no battle ever matched. I saw the olive trees of Ajaccio in my mind, my mother's stern profile, lit by firelight, the wild Corsican hills. I felt again the warm winds of the Mediterranean carrying the songs of shepherds and the whisper of salt on the air. France had order, polish, discipline. Corsica had soul. I wrote letters in those years. A few survive still filled with melancholy and strange reflections. In one, I confessed that I often dreamed of death, not out of despair, but out of a yearning to understand fate. Already I was wrestling with questions most men ignore until their final breath. What is greatness? What is liberty? What is the limit of a single human will? Those questions would follow me through every battlefield, every throne room, every sleepless night in the Tuileries. They follow me still, even here, as I speak to you from exile. But in those early years they were seeds quiet, dark, waiting to burst open. I became an artillery officer. Artillery is the mathematics of war, the science of thunder. To master it is to command the invisible. I felt power in the angles, the calculations, the controlled fury of cannon fire. And so the outsider found his weapon. The Corsican exile found the language in which he would speak to the world. But my story does not truly begin until the fires of Toulon, when ambition first tasted opportunity and destiny revealed the edge of its blade. Chapter 3. Fire at Toulon. Toulon. How strange that a single port city, unknown to most of Europe, should become the crucible where my destiny was first tempered by fire. I arrived there not as a hero, not as a conqueror, but as a young, ambitious artillery captain with more ideas than rank and more fury than influence. France was tearing itself apart again. Royalists had seized the city and opened its harbor to British ships. To lose Toulon would be to lose the revolution's breath. But to me, to the young man still carrying the cold loneliness of the military schools, it meant something different. It meant opportunity, the first true test of my mind against the world. When I reached the camp overlooking the harbor, what I saw filled me with both disgust and purpose. French officers argued over trivialities, while British cannons thundered. Confusion reigned. No one had the courage to seize the idea that lay in plain sight. Take the forts on the heights, place artillery there, cut off the harbor, force the British to flee. Simple, inevitable, mathematically perfect. But clarity is often mistaken for arrogance, especially in the young. They doubted me, this thin Corsican, with the fierce stare and the foreign accent. Yet when the plan worked, when we seized the heights, when our cannons roared down upon the enemy fleet, when British ships burst into flames against the dark water, they no longer doubted. I can still smell the smoke of that dawn, still feel the concussion of each shot ripple through my bones, still hear the cries of wounded men echo between the harbor walls. War is not poetry. It is not glory. It is precision and terror intertwined. But war, more than politics, more than education, more than love, reveals a man to himself. As the cannons thundered, I realized something with startling clarity. I was made for this. This language of fire and movement, of calculations written in smoke. A bayonet tore into my leg during the assault. The pain was sharp, blinding, but irrelevant. There is a sensation commanders rarely speak of, the moment when chaos bends to your vision, when thousands of lives move inside the pattern you have drawn. It is not joy. Joy belongs to children. It is a sense of rightness, of alignment between thought and reality. Toulon fell. France hailed me. I was promoted to brigadier general. But more important than any rank was the whisper I heard inside my own mind. France knows your name now. Do not let her forget it. From Toulon onward, destiny no longer felt distant. It pressed close to me, almost too close, like a blade sheathed at my ribs. Chapter 4. Grape Shot in Paris. There are victories carved in marble, and there are victories carved in dread. Paris, October 1795, was the latter. The revolution had devoured itself again, and a royalist mob surged through the capital. The government trembled. The streets swelled with revolt. Fear pulsed through the city like a fever. They summoned me, this newly famous general, to defend the Republic from its own children. When I arrived at the Tuileries, I saw chaos. Politicians shouting, soldiers unsure, civilians screaming. The mob advanced not with discipline, but with conviction, which can be more dangerous. They wanted to restore the monarchy. They wanted to crush the revolution under the heel of nostalgia. What did I want? At that moment, I wanted order, stability, a future for France that was more than constant bloodletting. So I took command, and I did what had to be done. Bring the cannon. That was all. Simple words, spoken quietly, yet they split history in two. We loaded them with grape shot, small balls of iron meant to tear through bodies in wide arcs. I positioned them along the streets leading to the Tuileries. As the mob surged forward, shouting, chanting, brandishing muskets and tricolor flags, I watched them approach and felt a slow tightening in my chest. These were Frenchmen, mothers' sons, citizens of the republic I claimed to defend. And yet, if Paris fell, France would fall. If France fell, my own rising star would die with it. In the moments before giving the order, time seemed to stretch into an endless thread. I remember a woman in the crowd, her face determined, her grip tight around the arm of a young boy. I remember the distant tolling of bells. I remember the cool autumn air brushing against my cheek. Then the thread snapped. Fire. The cannons erupted in thunder. The grape shot tore through the mob like a scythe through wheat. Screams flooded the streets. Smoke swallowed the air. Chaos dissolved into terror. The riot broke. The Republic was saved. I was rewarded, elevated to General of the Interior. But when the smoke cleared, a strange silence fell. Mothers gathered their dying sons from the cobblestones. A child wept beside his father, and I stood there victorious, yet hollow, wondering, for the first time, whether power always demanded such a price. People later called it the whiff of grapeshot. They said it launched my rise to supreme authority. Perhaps it did. But I have never forgotten the faces in that crowd. History remembers the cannon. I remember the silence afterward. Chapter 5, Josephine. I have commanded armies. I have redrawn the map of Europe. I have crowned myself emperor. But Josephine conquered me. I met her in Paris, in a world of salons and soft laughter where perfume drifted through candlelit rooms and conversation danced like music. She was 6 years older than I, a widow, a mother, a woman who had suffered the revolution's blade and survived with grace intact. She was elegance without arrogance, warmth without weakness, and she saw me, not the ambition, not the uniform, not the rising name, but the person beneath. I fell in love with her fiercely, irrationally, completely. In my early campaigns, when I led exhausted soldiers across mud and ice, when I marched through Italy's valleys or slept beneath foreign stars, her letters sustained me. I would read them in stolen moments, on horseback, by lantern light, and tents trembling under wind and gunfire. Her words were an anchor, a reminder that there existed a world beyond the battlefield's smoke. I wrote to her with the desperation of a young man starved for tenderness. Without you, I am nothing. I cannot sleep. I cannot think. Josephine, you are the pulse of my heart. Yet love, like power, is never simple. She was unfaithful during my absence in Italy. The rumors reached me through whispers in camp. They struck deeper than any bullet. At Lodi, at Arcole, even amid victory, a part of me rotted with insecurity. But here is the truth I learned too late. Josephine did not betray me out of malice. She was human, longing for affection, fearing abandonment, living in a society where women were traded like political currency. She was fragile in ways I refused to understand. When I returned to France, bitter and wounded, I confronted her not as a husband, but as a conqueror demanding tribute. And yet, the moment I saw her eyes, fearful, remorseful, shining with longing, I forgave her instantly. Such is the power of love. It overrides logic. It mocks ambition. She became my empress, my companion, my solace amid triumph and turmoil. And though fate later forced us apart, though duty demanded an heir she could not give me, Josephine remained the one person whose loss carved a permanent hollow in my chest. When she died years after our divorce, I felt it like a cannon shot through my soul. On St. Helena, in moments of quiet, her name still rises unbidden to my lips. I have commanded nations, but she commanded my heart. Chapter 6, The Italian Lightning Bolt. When they handed me command of the army of Italy in 1796, they did not give me an army. They gave me a skeleton. A ragged collection of starving men, boots worn through, uniforms patched with desperation, rifles rusted by rain and neglect. Their pay was months overdue. Their spirits long buried beneath the mud of forgotten battlefields seemed unreachable, but I understood hunger. I understood humiliation. I understood what it meant to be dismissed, underestimated, ignored. In their sunken eyes I saw a reflection of my younger self. On the morning I addressed them for the first time, the wind cut cold through the camp. Clouds hung low over the mountains of Piedmont, and the smell of damp earth mingled with the musk of unwashed bodies. Thousands of men gathered in front of me, some curious, some skeptical, some too exhausted to care. I stood before them, a general barely 26 years old, thin, pale, and burning with an inner fire brighter than any torch. "You are naked and ill-fed," I told them. "The government owes you much. It can give you nothing. Your patience, your courage, do you honor, but no glory comes from hunger." The wind carried their silence. Then I offered them the truth. "I will lead you into the most fertile plains in the world. There you will find honor, glory, and wealth, not empty promises, destiny." From that moment, they were mine. Or perhaps I was theirs. We marched as one an army resurrected by belief. What followed in Italy was not a campaign. It was a storm, a lightning bolt that tore through Europe and illuminated my name across its sky. The mountains of Piedmont were the first to feel the strike. The Austrians believed themselves secure behind the ridges, their lines fixed like stones. But mountains mean little to the man who sees the battlefield as a chessboard, each peak a piece to be moved. At Montenot we shattered their right. At Millesimo we tore open their center. At Dego we scattered their reinforcements like frightened birds. Each victory fed the next. Each risk demanded another. War became a rhythm, fast, decisive, intoxicating. But Lodi, that was the moment Europe first trembled at my name. The Austrians stood across the Adda River, cannons aimed directly at the bridge. The wooden planks shuddered under the artillery's violence. Smoke curled like serpents from the muzzles. Crossing meant death. But hesitation kills armies faster than bullets. I ordered the charge. As my grenadiers surged onto the bridge, lead tearing through their ranks, something awakened in me, something primal, electric, unstoppable. Without thinking, without even realizing I had moved, I ran to the front. Musket balls hissed past my face. Splinters exploded underfoot. The world narrowed to the bridge, the river, the Austrian line beyond. For a moment, a single heartbeat, I felt suspended between life and eternity. After the battle, my soldiers lifted me onto their shoulders, their voices rising in a thunder that rivaled the cannons. They praised me as if I were something more than human, and perhaps for that instant I felt as though I was. Victory after victory followed Castiglione, Arcole, Rivoli. Each battle honed me like a blade. Each triumph carved away the boy I had been. Italy adored me. France idolized me. Europe took notice. For the first time I sensed the shadow of a crown on my brow, not yet visible, but present, like the first glimmer of dawn before the horizon burns. But victory is a hungry companion. It never rests. It never says enough. And neither, it seemed, did I. Chapter 7. Egypt, Empire of Sand. Italy had given me glory. But glory alone does not satisfy a mind consumed by the idea of destiny. I wanted something greater, something ancient, monumental, eternal. I wanted to stand where Alexander had stood. Egypt called to me like a dream. When we set sail in 1798, I imagined myself not merely as a general, but as an architect of civilization. I brought with me more than soldiers. I brought scholars, scientists, engineers, mathematicians. I wanted to conquer Egypt, yes, but also to study it, unravel it, illuminate it. The desert struck me immediately with its immortality. The sand stretched endlessly, shimmering like powdered gold under a ruthless sun. The wind carried whispers older than any empire. The pyramids rose from the earth like frozen mountains of memory. Standing before them, I felt the weight of history press upon my shoulders, not as a burden, but as a mantle. Here, I thought, greatness is not measured in years, but in millennia. But Egypt was no mere monument. It was a battlefield waiting to devour the unprepared. At the Battle of the Pyramids, the Mamluk cavalry came at us in a furious wave horses, sleek with sweat, sabers flashing in the scorching light, war cries tearing the air. They were warriors born in the saddle, fierce and proud. But war had changed. Calculations defeat courage. Geometry defeats fury. I formed my men into square walls of bayonets facing outward like hedges of steel. The Mamluks crashed against us again and again, but they might as well have charged a mountain. Their valor shattered against our science. When the dust settled, the Nile ran quietly beside us, indifferent to the blood soaking its banks. I will never forget the sky that evening. A deep, bruised red, the color of endings and beginnings. The pyramids cast long shadows across the sand, as if embracing us into the fold of history. And yet, even in triumph, Egypt was unkind. A plague swept through our ranks. Supplies dwindled. The desert, silent and magnificent, became a mirror for my doubts. At night, beneath a canopy of stars brighter than any over Europe, I would lie awake thinking, is this what Alexander felt? Did he sense the same pull toward eternity? Did he too mistake ambition for destiny? The scholars made discoveries to Rosetta Stone among them. We mapped ruins, documented plants, measured the heavens. In the midst of conquest, we tried to resurrect an ancient world. But Egypt held a truth I did not want to face. Even the greatest civilizations crumble. Even the mightiest conquerors are forgotten by the sands they once ruled. When news reached me of France in political chaos, I knew the desert had taught me all it could. I left Egypt not in defeat, but in transformation. I had entered as a general. I left as something far more dangerous. A man who believed he could rule the future as confidently as he had mastered the past. Chapter 8. Romare. When I returned from Egypt, France no longer resembled the nation I had left behind. It was not a republic, it was a carcass being picked apart by politicians. Corruption choked every corridor of power. Fear prowled the streets. The Directory, those pale, trembling men sat on their thrones like frail guardians of a dying flame. I saw immediately what others refused to accept. France was collapsing. The revolution had devoured its purpose and was now feasting on itself. The people were exhausted, hungry for stability, hungry for a figure who could bind the shattered pieces together. And I, fresh from Egypt, bathed in the aura of myth, understood something profound. France needed a sword, not a debate. I did not yet intend to seize power. At least that is the lie I once told myself. But ambition is a tide. It rises quietly, then sweeps everything in its path. My brother Lucien, sharper in politics than I ever cared to be, whispered truths the way a general whispers commands. The nation is waiting, he told me, waiting for someone who can end this chaos. Perhaps he saw before I did the shape of what I was becoming. The coup of 18 Brumaire began with confusion, as most revolutions do. We moved the councils out of Paris to St. Cloud, under the pretext of danger, surrounding them with soldiers loyal to me. The deputies were suspicious, muttering like startled birds in a storm. Inside the chambers, tension burned like oil on fire. They questioned my intentions. They accused me of ambition. How strange to be accused of what I had not yet claimed openly. They demanded explanations. They demanded I swear loyalty to a government already rotting from within. I stepped before them, words burning in my throat, but emotion, yes, emotion betrayed me. My speech faltered, my vision blurred under their cries of dictator, tyrant, Caesar. For a moment the room swayed, history wavered. Had I hesitated then, perhaps I would have returned to the obscurity of a disgraced general. But destiny often hinges on a heartbeat. As the crowd surged toward me, my grenadiers burst through the doors. The deputies scattered like leaves in a gust. Lucien, with his voice rising above the chaos, declared the assembly dissolved. Soldiers marched upon the chamber, their footsteps echoing like verdicts. No vote, no debate. Power changed hands in a moment of pure clarity. When I walked out of St. Cloud, France was no longer a republic in practice. I was first consul, its leader, its guardian, its architect of the future. People sometimes accuse me of staging a dictatorship. Perhaps they are right. But listen to me. France did not need more freedom. It needed order. It needed direction. It needed a spine. And I had become that spine. In the quiet of that night, after the adrenaline faded, I sat alone and realized something profound. There are moments when a man does not seize destiny, destiny seizes him. Brumaire was one of those moments. Chapter 9, Emperor. When I became first consul, I believed that I had reached the summit of power. But power is never a summit. It is a staircase. With each reform, each victory, I ascended another step. France transformed beneath my hands. I reorganized her laws, her finances, her administration. I rebuilt her schools, her institutions, her pride. Efficiency replaced chaos. Merit replaced privilege. I did not merely govern, I constructed a new France, brick by brick, decree by decree. And yet every time I walked through Paris, its people gazed at me with an expression I recognized instantly. Expectation. A hunger for permanence. You must understand, Europe was led by kings who inherited power from dust-covered bloodlines. France, however, had a leader born from revolution, a soldier who rose by talent alone. To them, I was a contradiction, neither king nor servant, neither tyrant nor liberator. They needed a symbol that matched the authority I already wielded. A throne, a crown. And so the idea took root not in me alone, but in France. When the Senate proposed the imperial title, I hesitated, yes, truly. The revolution despised the word emperor. But the revolution had also devoured its children, and France needed stability more than ideology. Thus, on a cold December morning in 1804, beneath the vaults of Notre Dame, I accepted the destiny that had been spiraling toward me since Corsica. The cathedral glowed with candlelight, gold shimmering like captured sunlight. Nobles, generals, foreign envoys, all eyes upon me. The choir sang with voices that trembled the air itself. My mother watched from the gallery, proud and unsmiling. Josephine stood beside me. Then came the moment that would echo through history. The Pope lifted the crown, but I did not bow. No man would place destiny upon my head. I took the crown with my own hands, raised it, lowered it upon myself. A declaration, silent yet thunderous. I am not chosen by divine right. I am chosen by acts, by will, by the geometry of my victories. Then I crowned Josephine, her eyes shining with tears that glimmered in the candlelit haze. Some say that moment marked the death of the Republic. Perhaps. Or perhaps it marked the birth of something new, of France powerful enough to stand against the monarchies encircling her. But hear this truth from my own lips. That day, beneath the stained glass and incense, as the crown pressed its cold weight onto my brow, I did not feel invincible. I felt responsible, crushingly so. For a throne is not merely a seat. It is a burden of expectation, a promise made to millions, a vow etched into history. I had ascended the staircase of power to its highest step. Yet even then, even as applause thundered through the cathedral, another truth whispered within me. Empires are not won in coronations. They are lost in them. That whisper would follow me through every battle, every treaty, every restless night, until the end. Chapter 10. Master of Europe. There is a moment in a conqueror's life, brief, fragile, blinding, when he stands not only above his enemies, but above history itself. For me, that moment was Austerlitz. On the morning of December 2nd, 1805, the sun rose through a veil of mist, illuminating the frost-covered hills like embers beneath ice. My soldiers called it Le Soleil d'Austerlitz, the sun of Austerlitz. I still feel its warmth on my face, even here in exile. Across the valley, the armies of Russia and Austria stretched for miles. Two emperors combined against one. A lesser man would have trembled, but I saw the battlefield not as they saw it, not as a maze of hills and ponds and villages, but as a theorem, a grand equation waiting to be solved. They believed my right flank weak. I wanted them to believe it. They believed they were driving me back. I wanted them to believe that, too. When they moved, exposing their center, I struck. My reserves surged forward like a blade drawn from a scabbard. The Pratzen Heights, those golden hills rising above the frozen earth, became the axis on which Europe turned. I climbed them myself, watching the fog lift like a curtain on a stage where I was both playwright and protagonist. The battle unfolded in rhythms, charges, volleys, shouts, swallowed by cannon smoke. The frozen lakes cracked beneath retreating Russians, swallowing men and horses alike. I remember the air tasting of iron, gunpowder, and destiny. By midday, the Allied armies shattered. By evening, the Holy Roman Empire, a relic older than Charlemagne, began to collapse. In one day, the map of Europe changed. And I became master of it. Yet mastery is deceptive. People imagine it as exhilarating, intoxicating, triumphant. In truth, it feels like being lifted above the ground with nothing to hold on to. Victories followed like dominoes falling in perfect sequence. Jena and Auerstedt, Prussia, crushed. Friedland, Russia, humbled. Tilsit Tsar Alexander, offering alliance upon a raft in the Niemen River. Everything I touched bent to my will. Nations that once scorned me begged for treaties. Kings who mocked me bowed before me. The continent trembled with my footsteps. But even as Europe knelt, shadows lengthened. Spain, the ulcer that bled my strength drop by drop. A place where courage hid behind every farmhouse and hatred lingered in every alley. Guerrilla war is a poison, invisible, patient, fatal. It stained my soul more deeply than any battle. And then there was Britain, always Britain, untouchable behind her navy, stubborn behind her gold. To defeat her, I forged a continental system of vast economic blockade stretching from Lisbon to Moscow. A bold idea, a desperate one. I tried to suffocate an island with the lungs of a continent. It was not Britain that broke first. It was the countries forced to obey me. Power, like oxygen, cannot be withheld without consequence. Europe obeyed me, but uneasily. Allies whispered, kings murmured. Even my soldiers began to sense the tide shifting. But I pressed forward, believing, as I always did, that will could conquer circumstance. A man who rises too quickly begins to think himself invulnerable. A man who wins too easily begins to ignore the whispers of fate. A man who commands Europe begins to believe he commands destiny itself. In those years of triumph, I saw the world from the pinnacle of possibility. Yet every pinnacle casts a long shadow. I did not realize I was walking in mine. Chapter 11. A Marriage of Empires. Josephine. Her name still stirs in my chest like an ache that never fully heals. For many years she stood beside me, not merely as a companion, but as an anchor, a reminder that beneath the marble of power I was flesh, fallible, human. My victories delighted her. Her elegance steadied me. She charmed Europe where I conquered it. But an empire demands more than love. It demands continuity. It demands an heir. France wanted a dynasty. The world expected it. My bloodline, my legacy required it. Josephine had given me everything. Warmth, loyalty, artistry, grace, everything except a child. To this day, I do not know whether it was fate or biology or sorrow that denied her the ability to carry my heir. I only know the crushing weight of the decision I had to make. Ending our marriage was the most painful act of my life. Not war, not exile, not defeat. Divorcing Josephine. I remember that evening, the room lit softly by lamplight, her hands trembling, my own breath uneven. She sat composed, even regal, though grief quivered beneath her calm like a trapped bird. I spoke the words a man hopes never to speak to the one he loves, that our union, though blessed by affection, was failing the demands of empire. She nodded, silent, brave. A single tear slid down her cheek, glistening like a fallen star. No cannon blast has ever wounded me as deeply. After she left the palace, I sat alone in the vastness of my chambers, the echoes of footsteps fading into the cold corridors of power. Emperors do not cry, they say, but that night Napoleon Bonaparte did. The marriage that followed my union with Marie-Louise of Austria was not born of affection but of geopolitics. A Habsburg princess, a living bridge between old empires and my own new one. She was young, gentle, dutiful. She brought me what France demanded, a son. When the child was placed in my arms, my son, my heir, the King of Rome, I felt a surge of tenderness that startled me. His small fingers grasped mine with a strength far greater than his size. Yet beneath my joy lay a quiet sorrow. Josephine would never hold this child, and this child would never know the woman who shaped the man I once was. Marie-Louise fulfilled her role, and I cared for her in my way. But love, true love, had only visited me once. In those days, surrounded by triumph and family and imperial luxury, a strange melancholy drifted through me at times. Even at the height of my power, a whisper persisted. Greatness isolates. And even emperors long for something they cannot command. But the world allowed me little time for reflection. Storms gathered on the horizon. Europe trembled again. And in the distance loomed a vast, frozen land, beautiful, terrible, a land that would swallow my ambition whole. Russia, the white abyss. It called to me with a siren's voice, and I, blinded by victory, marched toward it willingly. Chapter 12. Russia, the white abyss. There are decisions a man makes not with reason, but with momentum. By 1812 I had moved so far, risen so high, commanded so much that retreat, even from an idea, have felt impossible. The continental system strained under its own weight. Smugglers thrived, merchants starved, and nations obeyed me only with clenched teeth. Russia, under Alexander, grew restless. He had once called me friend, rival, brother in arms. But Russia does not share power. Russia absorbs it. When he withdrew from our alliance, I felt not anger, but inevitability. Two suns cannot share the same sky. I told myself the invasion was strategic, necessary. I told myself that swift victory would force him into negotiation, that Russia would bow as Austria and Prussia had bowed. But beneath the logic, something darker stirred. I believed destiny would shield me from consequence. It was the first great lie I told myself. The Great Army. I assembled the Grand Army, the greatest force Europe had ever seen. Over 600,000 men marched beneath my eagles. French, Poles, Italians, Germans, Dutch, Spaniards. A mosaic of nations swept forward like a tide too vast for any border to contain. From my horse I watched their columns stretch to the horizon, the sun glinting off bayonets like ripples of silver water. It was magnificent, terrifying. But even then, as trumpets echoed across fields of wheat, a heaviness clung to me. The sheer scale of the march felt unnatural, as though I were guiding a beast that no longer obeyed its master. The farther we rode, the quieter France became behind us, and the more the silence felt like an omen. Crossing the Niemen. On June 24th, we crossed the Niemen River, the border of Russia. I stood upon a small rise, watching my soldiers ford the shallow waters, each step a ripple across history. I had crossed many rivers in my life, the Po, the Tagliamento, the Danube, the Nile. But the Niemen felt different, as though something ancient watched from the forests beyond, waiting, judging. The Russian army retreated before us, never offering battle, always drawing us deeper. It was not a war of heroes, it was a war of shadows. Villages burned before we reached them, crops destroyed, wells poisoned. The land itself turned against us. I had studied war all my life, but I had never studied emptiness. This was my first lesson in the Russian way. They do not fight for victory, they fight for survival. And survival makes men ruthless. The scorched earth. Day after day, we marched through a wasteland of ash and silence. Fields once golden with wheat lay blackened. Homes smoldered like the ghosts of lives abandoned. The carcasses of livestock rotted beside empty barns. My men, so many nations, languages, loyalties, looked to me for answers. I offered none. A leader cannot show doubt. But at night, when the fires dimmed and I walked alone among the sleeping bivouacs, a question grew inside me like a sickness. Why does Alexander not fight? Why does he retreat deeper, ever deeper, as though luring me toward a truth I refused to see? The heat of summer was unbearable. Men fainted. Horses died where they stood. Disease began to whisper through the ranks. But still we marched. I believed Russia could be forced to its knees by the sheer weight of numbers. I believed time itself obeyed me. Another lie. Smolensk. We took Smolensk, a city engulfed in flames before we entered. The Russians fought fiercely, then vanished into the burning streets. The fire devoured homes, churches, memories. The heat was so intense the air shimmered like metal. As I watched the blaze consume the ancient city, a strange unease settled in my chest. Victory tasted of ash. Somewhere in that inferno, a voice inside me whispered, "Turn back. Turn back now." But pride, yes, pride smothered it. Borodino, the blood mill. At last Alexander gave battle. Borodino, a name carved into the bones of every soldier who survived it. Dawn broke red on September 7th, as though the sun rose already soaked in blood. The Russians stood upon a ridge, their fortifications like jagged teeth. Their numbers nearly equal ours. This was the battle they had been waiting for. And so had I. The earth trembled under cannon fire. Columns advanced into storms of grape shot. The air filled with screams so constant they became a kind of music, the symphony of death. I rode along the lines, shouting orders, encouraging exhausted men, feeling the heat of battle pulse beneath my skin. Smoke wrapped around me like a shroud. For hours the outcome wavered. Charge, countercharge. Attack, repel. Advance, fall back. At the height of battle, as the air thickened with dust and flame, I felt an old spark, the fire of Arcole, the rush of Lodi, but muted, distant, muffled beneath the weight of command. We won. If such a word can be used for a field where over 70,000 bodies fell, Borodino was not a victory. It was a wound, one that never fully healed. Moscow. When we reached Moscow, we expected surrender. We expected diplomacy. We expected reason. Instead, we found silence. The city empty, its inhabitants gone, its heart abandoned. That night, as I stood in the Kremlin, fires erupted across the city. The sky glowed orange. Great buildings collapsed in showers of sparks. Moscow was burning, not by my hand, but by its own. The Russians would rather watch their holy city turn to embers than let it shelter us. For the first time in my life, I felt truly helpless. You can defeat armies, you can conquer nations, but you cannot command a people who choose destruction over submission. The long wait. I waited in Moscow for Alexander's surrender. I waited as the smoke settled. I waited as winter approached. But no messenger came, no envoy, no plea. Russia waited, too, for the cold. Each morning, frost crept farther across the fields. Each night, the wind grew sharper. Supplies dwindled. Horses starved. Men murmured with fear in their sleep. The truth sank slowly, painfully. We could not remain. We had to retreat. When I gave the order, it felt like tearing my own soul in two. The retreat. If Borodino was a wound, the retreat from Moscow was death by 1,000 cuts. Snow fell like the judgment of heaven. The wind cut through flesh like knives. Men marched in rags, boots wrapped in straw, lips blue, eyes hollow. The cold was an enemy beyond strategy. You cannot flank it. You cannot outthink it. You cannot defeat it. It crept into bones, into hearts, into hope itself. I saw soldiers freeze mid-step, bodies locked in motion like statues of ice. I saw cavalry horses collapse, their ribs rising like tombstones beneath their skin. I saw men break into madness, laughing as they sank into drifts of snow, too numb to know they were dying. And through it all, the Cossacks watched from the shadows, striking like wolves at our flanks, never fighting, always hunting. The Berezina River nearly destroyed us, bridges collapsing beneath the weight of desperation, screams rising from freezing water as men were swallowed whole. I crossed the last bridge surrounded not by triumph, but by ghosts. The truth about failure? When I left Russia, fewer than 10% of my army remained. 600,000 had marched in. Tens of thousands crawled out. Europe, once kneeling, rose in defiance. My enemies saw their chance. My allies drifted away. The tide that had carried me upward for so many years began to recede. And I who had felt invincible, learned the truth too late. Destiny is not a shield. Winter is not an army. And no man, not even Napoleon, can command nature. Russia did not defeat me in a single battle. It hollowed me out. One frozen step after another, I crossed the Niemen a conqueror. I recrossed it a mortal man. Chapter 13. The End of Empire. When I returned from Russia, France did not welcome me as a hero. It received me as a broken monument, cracked, weathered, diminished. The newspapers spoke in careful tones, the ministers in cautious whispers. The truth floated in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Napoleon had failed. The man they once believed invincible had been wounded not by men, but by winter. Still, I refused to accept defeat. Energy surged in me like a fever. I raised new armies, boys barely old enough to grow beards, men who had never marched beneath my banners. They called it desperation. I called it necessity. But Europe smelled blood. Prussia rose. Austria prepared. Russia, furious and emboldened, pushed west like an oncoming tide. Britain supplied gold, weapons, men always Britain, the island that refused to bend. Yet the blow that struck deepest was quieter, subtle, personal. My marshals, once the pillars of my empire, began to crumble. Their loyalty so fierce in Italy, so unshakable at Austerlitz, now wavered beneath the cold weight of self-preservation. They feared France's collapse more than my displeasure. Marechal Ney, brave Ney, the lion of the rearguard, now pleaded for peace. Soult grew cautious. Murat grew reckless. Berthier grew silent. And Josephine, my Josephine, was gone. Her death reached me like a whisper from the grave. I locked the door of my chamber and wept as I had not wept since the day I cast her out for the sake of empire. A strange truth settled in me that night. I looked as I had not wept since the day I cast her out for the sake of empire. A strange truth settled in me that night. I had spent my life conquering the world, yet failed to protect the heart that once held me gently. But the world did not pause for grief. The coalition. In 1813, the Sixth Coalition marched against me, a storm of nations united by fear, hatred, revenge, ambition. They framed it as liberation, but it was retribution, plain and simple. Still, I fought. At Lutzen, I struck them down. At Bautzen, I forced them to retreat. At Dresden, I triumphed spectacularly, the battlefield soaked with rain and courage. For a moment, the old fire returned. The Europe that defied me trembled again. My marshals failed me in my absence. Armies retreated under their hesitant command. Allies abandoned us. Bavaria turned, then Saxony. The Confederation of the Rhine dissolved like mist at dawn. At Leipzig, the battle of nations, the world came to end me. Hundreds of thousands clashed in a brutal storm of gunfire and screams. The ground churned to mud beneath trampling horses. Cannon smoke blotted out the sun. The bridge behind us exploded prematurely, an accident. They claimed trapping thousands of my men on the wrong side of the river. I watched helplessly as they were slaughtered or drowned, their cries echoing through the tumult, like the death wail of the empire itself. I knew then that the tide had fully turned. The star that had risen so swiftly was now descending. The fall. By 1814, the Allies marched on Paris. I hastened to defend the capital, driving my exhausted body through mud and sleepless nights, winning small, brilliant victories against superior numbers. For a moment it felt like Italy again, me against the world, passion against impossibility. But I could not be everywhere at once. They took Paris. My marshals surrendered. My government bent like reeds in the wind. Even my own family wavered. On April 6th, I abdicated. They say emperors do not cry, but when I pressed my signature onto that document, my hand trembling, my vision blurring, the tears came hot and bitter. I tried to give France glory. I leave her sorrow. That night, alone in my chambers, I attempted to end my life. The poison failed. Destiny, it seemed, was not yet finished with me. The first exile, Elba, a tiny island, a speck on the map. They sent me there, me, Napoleon, who had commanded continents. I tried to rule it as an emperor rules, organizing roads, schools, administrations, a small empire for a fallen emperor. But at night, the sea whispered through my window. France has not forgotten you. Letters reached me in secret. Reports of Louis XVIII's incompetence. Whispers of French officers drinking to my return. Veterans refusing to swear loyalty to the Bourbons. Hope returned, dangerous, seductive, alive. And so on February 26, 1815, I escaped Elba. Not with soldiers, not with guns. With courage, audacity, and a handful of loyal men. France awaited me. History awaited me. Destiny, battered but unbroken, awaited me. Chapter 14. The Final Flame. When my boots touched the shores of France once more, the wind felt familiar like an old friend returning with urgent news. My enemies laughed when they heard I had returned. A small man with a handful of followers, they said. He will be crushed before he reaches Paris. But they forgot something essential. I did not conquer France. France conquered me. As I marched north, soldiers sent to arrest me abandoned their posts to join me. Villagers ran from their homes in tears, throwing flowers, shouting my name. Regiments knelt as I approached, pledging loyalty to the man they once followed through fire and frost. When they who had vowed to bring me back in an iron cage confronted me with his troops, I rode forward alone. I opened my coat and shouted, "If any among you would shoot his emperor, here I stand." Silence, then shouts, cheers, weeping. A tidal wave of emotion crashing over the ranks. They ran to me, embraced me, lifted me. In those moments I felt something rare, not power, but love. I entered Paris not as a conqueror, but as a father returning to his children. Thus began the 100 days, the final flame of my life, a flame that burned too brightly, too briefly, to be forgotten. But even as the crowds roared, as tricolor flags fluttered, as the old fire rekindled in my heart, a shadow waited on the horizon, a place called Waterloo, a field that would etch itself into eternity with mud, rain, and shattered dreams. But that battle, that reckoning, belongs to the next chapter. Chapter 15, The Final Flame, Waterloo. Even now, when I speak the word aloud, it carries the weight of an epitaph, not merely for an army or an empire, but for the man I once believed myself to be. After my return from Elba, I worked with furious intensity. In 100 days, I rebuilt armies, reformed ministries, rewrote laws. The impossible again became momentum. Europe trembled, not from fear, but from recognition. Napoleon had risen from the grave, yet the nations that once knelt now united with iron resolve. This was no longer strategy, no longer politics. This was a crusade to end me forever. I marched to Belgium to strike first, to split the Allied forces before they could join. At Ligny, I defeated the Prussians. At Quatre-Bras, Ney held his ground through fire and chaos. The old rhythm returned, the rhythm that had carried me through Italy, through Austria, through the crowns of Europe. But destiny, once my ally, had grown fickle. At Ligny, Victory did not become annihilation. At Carter-Brass, coordination failed. The precise machinery of my glory, timing, intuition, the seamless harmony of commanders began to falter. And then came June 18th, a field south of a village called Waterloo, a battlefield soaked in mud and foreboding. The sky hung low, swollen with rain. The earth, churned by hooves and wheels, clung to boots like chains. My cannons sank into the mire, their thunder muted by the weight of mud. I surveyed the Allied lines. Wellington's army stretched across the ridge, composed, silent, immovable. He was a man I respected, calm where others panicked, steady where others broke. But I believed still that I could shatter him. One more victory, one last act of brilliance, and France would yet rise. The battle begins. It began late, too late. The soaked ground delayed our artillery. The gods of war had already turned their faces away. We struck Hougoumont, first a great estate that became the anvil of the day. My men fought like lions, but the walls held, swallowing battalion after battalion. The estate did not fall. Hougoumont was not a battle. It was a wound that bled us slowly, steadily. Then came the infantry assault columns advancing across the rolling fields, bayonets glinting with resolve. They marched into the maw of British volleys, the rhythm of musket fire echoing like the ticking of a vast, merciless clock. I still recall the sensation of watching brave men disappear into smoke, knowing I had set them into a storm I could not dispel. And then, a cry from the left. The Prussians are coming. Blucher, relentless, furious Blucher, was advancing upon our flank. The Prussians had not retreated to lick their wounds. They had marched through the night, driven by vengeance and iron loyalty. I needed speed, precision, thunder. But chaos had settled into the chain of command like a sickness. Ney, bewildered by conflicting reports and desperate for a breakthrough, launched the cavalry too early. I watched with a mixture of awe and dread as wave after wave of horsemen charged uphill into Wellington squares, their sabers flashing, their shouts piercing the smoke. It was beautiful, terrible, hopeless. Infantry squares 4 walls of bayonets are death to cavalry. My men were magnificent, but valor does not rewrite the geometry of war. They died by the thousands. Still, I held hope. Still, I believed the decisive moment would come. When the Imperial Guard stepped forward, the Sacred Guard, the very soul of my empire, I felt the old fire flare within me. Forward, I whispered. Show them who we are. They marched with perfect steadiness, faces stern, uniforms immaculate, despite the mud. Every eye on the field turned toward them. Even Wellington held his breath. But the ridge hit a line of British soldiers lying prone. A trap, a masterstroke. As my guard crested the hill, the British rose as one and fired. The line of my immortals staggered, faltered, broke. For the first time in history, the Imperial Guard retreated. A cry spread across the field like a shockwave. La Garde recule. The Guard is falling back. And with it, my empire collapsed. I felt something break inside me. Not a bone, not a muscle, something deeper. The invisible force that had carried me from Corsica to the thrones of Europe. It snapped. The battlefield dissolved into chaos, shouting, trampling, the desperate flight of men who had lost not only the fight, but the belief that had once made them invincible. Night fell on defeat, on me, on the world I had built. The second abdication. Paris did not resist this time. France, my France, had become too tired to bleed for me again. I abdicated once more, No tears this time, only silence. They exiled me not to Elba, where escape was possible, but to a rock carved by wind and isolation. St. Helena, I had commanded half of Europe. Now I commanded nothing, not even my own future. But exile has a strange way of peeling back illusions. And on that lonely island, beneath the endless Atlantic sky, I learned who Napoleon truly was. Chapter 16, St. Helena, Echoes in the Void. St. Helena, a prison carved by nature, polished by despair. The wind is constant here, a mournful companion that whispers through the rocks at all hours. It carries no warmth, no softness, only reminder. I arrived like a ghost of myself, once feared by nations, now measured by the suspicious eyes of British officers who guarded me as if I still commanded armies. Longwood House, my final residence, was damp, cramped, infested with rats and mold. A poor dwelling for an emperor, perhaps, but fitting for a man forced to confront the wreckage of his own ambition. The days blended into one another. I walked the barren paths, my steps slow, my breath thin. The sea stretched endlessly, mocking the idea of escape. But in that monotony grew reflection. For the first time since childhood, I was still. I thought of Corsica, the salt, the mountains, the fierce pride of my mother. I thought of the military schools, the loneliness, the hunger to prove myself. I thought of Josephine, her laughter, her warmth, the wound of letting her go. I thought of France, its hopes, its blood, its betrayal, its glory. And I thought of myself. Was I a hero, a tyrant, a visionary, a monster? Perhaps I was all of these. Perhaps I was none. History does not sculpt its figures gently. It chisels them with conflict, reshapes them with time, and judges them with the impossible clarity of hindsight. My jailers believed they had broken me, that isolation would erode my spirit. But they misunderstood the nature of my ambition. It was never to be adored, never to be worshipped, never to be immortal. My ambition was to act, to shape the world, to carve my will upon the stone of time. Here, in exile, I found a strange peace. With no armies, no diplomats, no ministers. I became simply Napoleon the man, not Napoleon the emperor. I dictated my memoirs to the few companions who remained loyal. I walked among the wind-swept ridges. I studied the sky, the constellations shifting as they had during my campaigns, and sometimes when the wind fell still, I heard echoes of drums, of cannons, of cheering crowds, of whispered prayers, of dying men calling my name. Memory is a battlefield more haunting than any I ever commanded. As illness crept through me slow, deliberate, merciless, I began to feel the final approach of fate. One evening, as the sun bled into the Atlantic, I whispered a truth I had never admitted. I have known glory, I have known failure, but I have also known life fully, fiercely, unmistakably. When I finally closed my eyes for the last time on May 5th, 1821, I did not cling to titles or victories. I held instead to the fragile thread of existence, the journey of a boy from Corsica who dared to take destiny by the throat. Let history judge me. Let nations argue. Let scholars debate. I lived. I acted. I burned brightly, too brightly perhaps, but never in vain. And though the world may bury my body on an island forgotten by the tides, my echo, my flame, will endure wherever ambition stirs, wherever a man refuses to accept the limits of the ordinary. Epilogue, the weight of memory. If you have walked with me through the corridors of my past, through the dust of battlefields, the glow of coronations, the frozen silence of Russia, and the lonely winds of this Atlantic rock. Then perhaps you now understand something essential. My life was never the story of an emperor. It was the story of a man chasing the horizon of himself. I began as a child in Corsica, a boy too small, too fierce, too hungry for the narrow world that contained him. I grew into a soldier, restless, precise, forged by mathematics and ambition. Then into a general, carried by the thunder of cannons, the devotion of my men, and the intoxicating clarity of victory. And finally into an emperor, a figure molded not only by will, but by nations that sought in me an answer to their chaos. But beneath every title, beneath every uniform, beneath every laurel placed upon my head by fate or by my own hand, I remained Napoleon, the same boy staring out from Corsica's cliffs, believing the world waited for him. And in truth, it did, for a time. But destiny is not conquered by brilliance alone, nor by courage, nor by the vast machinery of empire. It is shaped by choices, some wise, some catastrophic. As I sit here, my body weakened, my glory faded, my footsteps forgotten by the corridors of power. I see my life not as triumph and downfall, but as a single, unbroken arc of will. What have I learned? What truth remains when the cannons fall silent, when the crown is dust, when the world you commanded becomes a memory carried only by the wind? Perhaps this: a man is not measured by the time he rules, but by the depth with which he lives. I lived deeply in victory and defeat, in love and loss, in brilliance and blindness. I shaped nations. I reshaped Europe. I carved my name into the bones of history, not for immortality, but because I could not do otherwise. I was a storm, and storms do not apologize for their nature. And yet, as the ocean breathes around this island, as each evening paints the horizon in colors I never noticed in my youth, I feel a gentler truth settling into me. Greatness is not dominion. It is not the number of battles won, nor the territory claimed, nor the fear one inspires. Greatness is presence, the willingness to step into the unknown with conviction, to act when others hesitate, to dream beyond what the world permits. If I am remembered, let it be not for crowns or conquests, but for the force with which I lived, for daring to believe that one life, one fragile, finite existence, could bend the arc of nations. As the end draws nearer, I sense no fear, only completion. The sea that surrounds St. Helena does not imprison me. It mirrors the vastness I once carried within myself. Its waves whisper the same message destiny whispered to me long ago. Everything ends, but nothing is lost. Not the crack of muskets at Lodi, not the cheers in Paris, not the tears of Josephine, not the silence of Moscow, not the courage of my soldiers, their boots worn, their hearts unbreakable. All of it remains, not in monuments, nor in books, nor even in memory, but in the invisible pulse that moves humanity forward. If you have listened to my story, then a piece of me walks with you now, and if ever, in your own life, you stand at the edge of possibility, uncertain, trembling, ready to turn back, remember the boy on Corsica who looked across the sea and chose to leap. Remember that destiny belongs to the daring. For the first Napoleon Bonaparte have reached the end of my road, but the world, your world, still waits. Go, live your life with the force of a cannon's roar and the clarity of a sharpened will. Do not seek to rule the world. Seek instead to rule yourself, and through that, You will shape the world in ways unseen. This is my final command, my final confession, my final gift. I am gone, but my voice, my fire, remains.